Hey guys, and welcome back. This is bimzycodes here. In today's lesson, we're going to be going over particle effects. So what I want to do is emphasize when the player grabs one of the droppable objects falling from the sky. So we're going to create an interaction with the player when he picks up a new object, whether it's a obstacle or if it's a scoreable object, and we're going to create a particle effect that sort of spawns at the location where the droppable object gets destroyed. So it sort of looks like it's exploding. So let's create our particle effect. So we're going to go in here and I'm going to go to effects and particle system. And I'm going to rename this one quickly to explosion. And this one's going to be for our score. So let's call it explosion score. And let's get straight into this. And we want to make this sort of emulate an explosion effect. So to do this, let's first mess around with this shape here. So I want to set this shape to something like a sphere. Instead of it emitting out like a cone shape, we'll use a sphere, and straight away you'll notice that the particles are sort of randomly being generated in every direction. So that's what we want. Now we're going to go to start speed, and I'm going to set this one to 3 maybe, and I'm also going to adjust the start lifetime. I want to make this 0.3, I think. Maybe we'll make this maybe 2 for now. So that sort of looks all right. Now I actually want to set a texture to my shape, and I'm just going to give it this sort of default checker texture. I think that'll make it look a little bit better. And our duration, I'm going to set it to 1. So our explosion score, duration 1, it's looking pretty good. Looping, we're going to untick that. Actually, we'll keep this looping ticked for now while we create our explosion score effect. Pretty warm. Why is it no longer, play. Yeah, so in case you didn't know, you had to actually play this particle effect in this here. So we can pause it, play it, restart it, stop it, restart it. But if you untick this looping, it'll automatically stop the particle effect. So we want to make sure that's ticked, and we'll just play that while we test. So I think our shape is sorted out. Let's go to our color over lifetime. So this property, you can enable any properties you want to, or any functionality you want for your particle effect. So I'm going to enable this color over lifetime. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start setting up this color. So this bottom row here is for our color, and this top row here is for our alpha. So I'm going to want to introduce an alpha to so we're going to want to make these fade out over time. And straight away you'll notice our particle effects are fading out sort of from the start to finish. But I don't want them to actually be fading straight away, so I'm going to set my alpha to full here, so they're only fading at the end of their lifetime. Then I'm going to introduce some color, so I'm going to set maybe the base color to a light orange, and I'll make the color as we're sort of exiting a yellow, a very, very light yellow, and then we'll put the color in the middle to a, actually I'll make that yellow. Oops. And we'll make this last one a slightly darker orange. And we actually want to bump up our emission rate a little bit so it looks more like an explosion. So I'm going to set this to 25. Now you can see that in the scene there. It's actually looking quite good. And I'm also going to set my size over lifetime. So if we open this one up, we can actually sort of select different stuff, but I'm going to do random between 2 constants. So my first constant I'm going to set up as 3 maybe, and our last constant I want to do 0.2. So what does that look like in the scene? So in our game scene, it's actually looking quite cool. I sort of like that explosion effect, but I might actually want to make this a bit bigger so that the smallest one is a bit smaller. 4. I'm liking 4 actually. That looks pretty good, and I might actually bump up the emission rate over lifetime to 30. So that looks more like an explosion to me. And you'll notice we've got this color over lifetime. We can actually adjust this start color to sort of make the whole particle effect as a whole darker, or like apply a shade of green over the top of it. So if this is white, we're sort of taking this base color, but when we apply this extra shade, it sort of affects the whole explosion's color, which I sort of like. So we can use this to actually create multiple variants of the same explosion. So as I mentioned before, we want two different explosions, the score explosion and the obstacle explosion. So this is what this parameter here is what I'm going to use to determine what explosion we're going to have. And I think that just about wraps up this explosion effect. So let's go ahead and exit this. So as I mentioned before, I want to have an explosion score, and I also want to have a explosion obstacle. So straight away, I'm just going to rename this to obstacle, and I'm going to make our score be more green. So let's move these explosions so they're not overlapping each other. Explosion green, I like that, and then I'm going to make this one more shade of orange. Actually, the green might look bad behind the grass, so I'm going to make it... Purple doesn't really work, does it? Maybe we'll do yellow and red. So yellow could be the score one, and then explosion orange could be... Yeah. All right, that looks all right. So that one actually looks thicker. All right, I think I like this. So we've got explosion score and explosion obstacle. Now I'm going to go ahead and prefab these. Our prefabs folder is over here, and let's just throw that in there. Explosion score, explosion obstacle. Now we're going to need a way to actually instantiate these when our obstacles die, when our droppable objects die. So we're going to go ahead and add that to the code right now. Jumping in, let's go to our droppable script. And we need to find out where this droppable is getting killed. So if I remember correctly, we've got this droppable destroyer, which will destroy the other game object if it's of tag droppable. Now what I actually want to do is find out all other cases where this is being used. So I'm going to run a control find. So if I hit Control Shift F, we can search for all droppables with this string in the entire solution, and we're going to hit find all, and we find out that we're actually using it here in the droppable destroyer class and also in the player class. So in both these places, I believe we end up destroying the droppable. If droppable is obstacle, lives -1. Ah, interesting. We don't actually destroy the obstacle. No, we do. We destroy it here. So we need a way to distinguish if the droppable is an obstacle. So what I'm actually going to do is create a method in my droppable class called create, so private void, or it's got to be public actually. So we're going to do public void create explosion. And we're going to pass in a public game object, call that explosion. And then here in our explosion, we're going to instantiate explosion at the transform.position, and also we're going to grab an identity of our rotation. So we're going to do quaternion identity. So this will create a new explosion game object at this current game object, which is the droppables position, and we're going to be cloning the rotation of this droppable object as well. And now this public method can actually be called from here. So before we destroy this game object, we're going to call other.getComponent, and we already know that this game object has a droppable component on it because we've looked for this tag, and we're just going to assume that everything tagged with droppable will have a droppable component. And then we're going to call create explosion. And we want to do the same thing in our player script, just here, other.getComponent, create explosion. Now if we go back to our game, all we need to do to get this working is assign the explosions to our prefabs. So I'm actually going to delete these two from the game scene. And if I close this externals folder, find our prefabs folder, we're going to find all the obstacles. So I think it's cheese, hamburger, and hot dog are our obstacles. And then we're going to also drag the explosion obstacle into this explosion. Now we're going to grab all of our scoring droppables, and we're going to drag the explosion score onto here. Now let's run our game and see if this works. So before I forget, I've actually made a few mistakes here. So what we're going to want to do is go to our explosion particles, and we're going to want to set these flags to not looping, and we're also going to want to set these stop actions to destroy, and that way the effect won't loop more than once, so it'll only play for 1 second, and once it stops, the stop action will be called to destroy the game object. Now the next mistake I made is if we go into the shape over here and the texture, we want to actually create a new texture for this particle shape, because if we take a look at the default texture, it doesn't actually look that good in our scene. So if we drag this guy in, it doesn't actually look that good, and we're using a different texture before that we can't actually use. So we're going to go ahead into paint.net, create a basic white cube texture, and we're going to want to save that one out into a new texture file. So let's go save as, and we're going to go into our directory of where our project is, grocery catcher, assets, and let's create a new folder here called textures. So textures, and I'm just going to call this particle shape. Particle shape. Save, and that's just a white image. And now if we go back into our game, we'll be able to find the new textures folder and particle shape. Now let's make this a default texture. And apply that in our game. And now if we go back here and we drag this particle texture there, it should work as expected. Now if we play this, it's working as expected. Ensure read write is enabled on our texture. So we need to make sure this here is ticked on our texture so we don't get that error that was happening before. So go to your texture, the particle shape texture, enable read write, hit apply, and then of course we need to apply these changes to our actual prefab. So let's go into our prefab and select our new particle texture for our shape. So where's our shape? Default particle, and we're going to want to just type particle, here, it's here. We can either search for it, or if we find it, we can just double click that one, and that's now selected. And if we drag this into our game scene, we can see those, and they look pretty good actually. So I think that's everything fixed, and we can now play the game to see what happens. So now that we've got the particles implemented, we should see them exploding when they either collide with the player or with the ground. We've also got the yellow ones exploding for the score objects and the red ones exploding for the obstacles. So that's looking a lot better already. That wraps everything up for this lesson. I'll see you guys in the next one.